Of all our hearts, be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Today is Harvest Sunday, an exciting day, and we have an interesting reading. A reading talking about some scary things, and then ending with the final line, but this is the beginning of the birth pangs. Not quite a Harvest Sunday gospel, but one that I will be able to bring the harvest into a little bit. Now, to start off, I want to tell a little story because it's my husband's birthday this week. There's a funny story about his birth, and as family stories go, I'm not sure how much of it is 100% accurate. As the story is told, his parents were planning to have one more child. Brian was going to be their second child. And throughout the whole pregnancy with him, there was no particular indication that there were going to be twins. They didn't do ultrasounds or sonograms as often back then, and there was no reason to think that there would be multiple babies. And then the day of his birth came early. Brian was born about a month premature. The doctor delivered him and then stopped, surprised, saying, "There's another one." The story goes that my father-in-law exclaimed, "No, there's not. Put his shit back in." Brian's twin brother was born 9 minutes later, much to everyone's surprise. Our gospel passage for today ends with the image of birth pangs. Mark writes that this is but the beginning of the birth pangs. Having had a baby before, did my mother-in-law notice any differences the second time around? And my father-in-law's supposed outburst during the delivery as well. Birth pangs for him during the actual birth. One can only imagine how those first few weeks and months and even years went differently than expected or planned. My in-laws very well could relate to Mark's words of this only being the beginning. My poor in-laws, who had only been preparing for one more baby, now had to secure a second set of everything babies needed. So I turn to the gospel. Today's gospel starts with Jesus leaving the temple after seeing the widow leave her 2 small coins. And that's what we heard last week. Jesus sits and watches people as they present their money to the temple treasury. And Jesus seems to be on a roll for pointing out the unexpected and the different viewpoints. Because as they walk out, he hears the disciples talking about how big the buildings are and how great they are. "Teacher, have you seen these?" Which for the disciples coming from a rural area would not have seen buildings as big or as magnificent as the temple. And so they were amazed by it. Similarly, someone coming from flat corn country to New York City's Times Square. But Jesus is quick to say, don't be distracted. Don't focus on these worldly things. These buildings are not going to be here forever. That is not what is important, disciples. Change your focus. Do not let yourself be led astray. Don't be led astray by talks of wars and all of these bad things. Focus on what is important. This is only the beginning of the birth pangs. The end is yet to come. I'm going to circle back around to that. I think Mark's image of birth pangs is something that we all can relate to at some point in our life. Even if we are not women, even if we have not given birth. The process of bringing something to fruition, whether it is a big project or a big task, that takes time and energy, and often blood, sweat, and tears to get it off the ground and going. And perhaps those projects have been successful or unsuccessful. And there was pain and discomfort before, during, the birth of those projects. And this may be true for both parents involved in different ways. But what is important to note is that out of those pangs comes something new, maybe unexpected or totally unplanned, like my brother-in-law. Relationships also can have birth pangs. Friendships grow and may turn into something deeper, or they may end altogether. And there is often a period of tribulation and possible pain during the process as they transform into something new, maybe into becoming best friends, or into getting engaged, or sometimes separation and loss and heartache. Either way, new life and new ways of relating emerge. We can also relate to the birth pangs that accompany sickness and cancer for ourselves and others, and sometimes results in death for loved ones. Not all diseases and illnesses end badly, but all must go through the hard time with pain and discomfort and loss of some sort. And a new state of being emerges on the other side. New health or new life in some form, heralded by those pangs and tribulations. Transitions always bring their own birth pangs as you prepare for what is coming next. People's anxiety is raised and uncertainty is present. And it's hard to tell what new life will look like here in a few months. What new things will be birthed at the Church of the Nativity as you wait for a new rector to come. And as you go through that process, even if you want the rector tomorrow, that's not how the process goes. You have to wait and go through the growing pains and the pieces of that. And at the end, birth a new life with a new rector to help lead and guide you and shepherd you on your journey. And we also look at the news this week, some very real birth pangs that hit the world around us. We had the fires in California, which are still going. As of this morning, 76 deaths and 1,000 people still missing. For those individuals and families affected, life will never be the same, even though new life in some form will take place. And I'm heartened by the rector who lost her church to the fire, but has borrowed some space at a nearby church and is still committed to shepherding her flock through this new process and to see what new life will come out of this for her congregation. In a new way, we all relate much more than we would like to the birth pangs the gospel talks about. And we're living into them, waiting with trepidation what new birth can come. And we hope upon hope that it won't be more death instead. Even as governments and militaries and leaders strive to take charge of battles and wars and terroristic acts. And I'm reminded it is only 1 week since we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the end of the Great War. The war to end all wars. And 100 years later, there is still war across the world. And we worry, where might new attacks strike us? Can we keep ourselves and our loved ones safe? Are we even able to? It's true. It's a bleak and scary world we live in. And yet, it is important to note that as Christians, we know that this is not the end. The words that Jesus spoke to his disciples in Jerusalem are the same words that we need to be hearing today. This is not the end. Do not let yourselves get distracted and led astray. Stay focused. There have been many disasters and attacks before, many wars and rumors of war with nations rising against nations and kingdoms against kingdom. It's not too cynical to believe that they will continue to happen. We haven't experienced the first of these or the last of these. Each day and each season of life brings forth its own challenges, its own pains, its own sufferings. And like the change of season that we're starting to experience in Florida, with a little bit of cold weather, we don't know how long the season will be. And we know it's hard not to know how much to embrace or distance ourselves from it, since the season will be passing. Do we even want to live into it? Because there's a chance that things could get worse before they get better. Jesus says to his disciples, this is but the beginning of the birth pangs. But thankfully, this is not the end. The gospel message does not stop here. It's a sobering message, a cautionary message, to not let ourselves get so focused on the things of the world that it lets us get distracted from God and from Jesus. Jesus' statement encourages us to focus less on the word beginning and focus more on the word birth. Sometimes it's hard to remember that after the birth pangs come the actual birth. And that is where the new life is. This time of waiting and preparation, and it seems like it can go on forever. And then the new life comes. And as Christians, we already know this story, and we know how it ends. The birth pangs of death on Good Friday are what lead to the resurrection on Easter Day and the new life. We are reminded that we can't have Easter Day without Good Friday first. There will always be some trials, some pain, and some suffering before the birth of new life is able to take place, before something new emerges. Granted, we don't always know what that new thing will be. Indeed, it's not always what we expect it to be. You can ask my father-in-law about that. But depending on how that new life presents itself to us, we may be ready for it, or we may have to find some new ways to adapt to it. They weren't prepared to have 2 children. They weren't prepared for twins. But thankfully, people stepped up, their family stepped up, their neighbors stepped up to help them as they prepared for this unexpected and joyous second child. And it serves as a reminder to us that we don't do that work alone. We don't do the work that Jesus calls us to do alone. God is there with us every step of the way, guiding us and leading us and encouraging us and nourishing us and giving us life and breath and that kind of push that we need. And we have each other to count on, as well as those who have traveled the journey before us. I talked about that 2 weeks ago with the saints who have gone before us. Jesus walked that path to the cross. The saints followed him on that path, and we follow along on that path, encouraged and sustained and uplifted by those around us, walking this journey together. And I would be remiss, since I'm talking about birth, to not point and remind us that we're going to be getting ready for our birth soon. In 2 weeks, we will celebrate the beginning of the season of Advent, the time of waiting and preparation for Christmas, the birth of God into our world through the person of Jesus Christ. If the world can withstand the birth pangs of God being born into humanity, let me say that again because it's a lot. If the world can sustain the birth pangs of God being born into humanity, God, Emmanuel, God with us, God coming into human flesh, into the world to be with us, then how much more encouraged can we be to endure the birth pangs of the present time? God, Emmanuel, God with us in the flesh of Jesus, coming and taking on and understanding what this human life is, and knowing so poignantly, so deeply, so intimately the human experience, reminding us that God is with us during these times and that God won't leave us alone. God will continue to walk right beside us as we go through whatever season we are in, whatever season we are experiencing. And then, when the time is just right, God will be there to help birth that new life for us. But in the meantime, we have to stick to the path, not be distracted like the disciples, but stay focused. And Jesus encourages us as he encourages his disciples to have faith and to listen closely to the words of the scripture. And I'm going to read a couple of verses from our letter to the Hebrews that brings this home. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. May we await God's mercy and love and peace with faithfulness. May we strive to provoke, to encourage, and sustain one another to love and good deeds in the meantime. And may the God who promised us this be visible to us, encouraging and strengthening us as the new day approaches. And may we all remember that the birth pangs will yet lead to new birth, to new life, to new things beyond our human understanding. Because the new life that God has in store for us is more than we could ever hope for and imagine. May you be sustained in your journey and your path and uplifted by God's promises. Amen.
Amen.